The bright moon shone over Antarctica as the alien probe broke through Earth's atmosphere. It wasn't large or threatening, just a smooth, silver object about the size of a car that landed with barely a sound on the ice. Within hours, scientists from around the world rushed to the site. Military forces established a perimeter, while experts in hazmat suits cautiously approached the otherworldly visitor. No one knew what to expect. Was it a weapon, a message, or something else entirely? Dr. Han Jiwoo stepped forward, his breath visible in the freezing air. As Earth's leading xenolinguist and diplomatic coordinator, he had trained for this moment his entire career, though he never truly believed it would come. Fascinating, he whispered as the probe began to hum and project a holographic image. The light formed into a tall, crystalline figure that sparkled like diamond under the Antarctic sun. "We greet Earth," the figure said in perfect English. "I represent the Galactic Hegemony. We have been observing your world for some time." The gathered scientists exchanged looks of amazement. First contact. The moment humanity had both dreamed of and feared. Over the next 3 days, leaders from every major nation arrived at the hastily constructed base. Dr. Han led the interactions, learning that the crystalline beings called themselves the Lux. They controlled thousands of star systems and had been watching Earth for centuries. "Your civilization is classified as Category 3, the Lux representative explained during the fourth meeting. "Technologically developing, but socially primitive. We offer you protectorate status." Dr. Han maintained his professional demeanor, but he noticed how the alien spoke with a subtle condescension. "What does protectorate status entail?" he asked. The terms became clear. Earth would surrender its sovereignty and grant access to its resources. In exchange, the hegemony would guide human development along proper paths and protect Earth from unnamed cosmic threats. In private meetings, world leaders argued fiercely. Some wanted to accept, fearing the consequences of refusal. Others were outraged at the proposal. "They speak to us like we're children," the Brazilian president said angrily. "They want our resources and offer vague promises in return." The Chinese premier nodded. "Their technology is clearly advanced, but that doesn't give them the right to claim our world." After much debate, Earth reached a unanimous decision, a rarity in global politics. Dr. Han would deliver their answer. The next morning, facing the shimmering hologram of the Lux diplomat, Dr. Han spoke with careful respect but unmistakable firmness. "The nations of Earth appreciate your offer," he said. "However, we must decline. Humanity wishes to develop on its own terms while establishing peaceful relations with the galactic hegemony as equals." The Lux representative's crystalline form seemed to flicker with what might have been surprise. "Your species shows unusual resistance," it said after a pause. "Our analysis suggests you possess concerning developmental anomalies. We strongly recommend accepting our protection." Dr. Han felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Antarctic cold. The words were polite but carried an underlying threat. "The people of Earth value our independence," he replied. "Please respect our boundaries." The Lux hologram stared at Dr. Han for an uncomfortably long moment. "Very well. Your decision has been recorded. The hegemony respects the self-determination of all species, even when their choices are unwise." The meeting ended with formal pleasantries, but Dr. Han couldn't shake his sense of unease. The alien seemed genuinely bewildered by Earth's refusal, as if rejection was a concept they rarely encountered. 2 days later, the probe began to rise. Government officials and military personnel watched from a safe distance as it ascended smoothly into the sky, eventually disappearing from even the most powerful telescopes. "Well, that's that," said General Park, the South Korean military representative. "They came, they saw, they left." But Dr. Han wasn't convinced. As the international team packed up their equipment, he noticed something small and metallic half buried in the snow where the probe had rested. Looking closer, he realized it was a secondary device, no bigger than his palm, with a faint blue light blinking steadily. He called over the technical team, who carefully extracted the object. Their analysis was troubling. It was transmitting data, scanning everything from military communications to power grid information. They left a spy behind, Dr. Han told the Emergency Council that evening. This device is mapping our defenses, our infrastructure, everything. The American delegate frowned. Should we destroy it? Dr. Han considered this. No. If we destroy it, they'll know we found it. Better to feed it limited information while we prepare. Prepare for what? Asked the Russian representative. Dr. Han looked at each face around the table. I don't think the Lux are used to being told no. Their confusion at our refusal wasn't diplomatic. It was genuine surprise. They expected us to submit, and we didn't. I believe they'll be back, and not with just a probe next time. Over the following weeks, the world's governments began quiet preparations while maintaining public calm. Military forces coordinated defense plans, scientists studied the alien technology, and diplomats prepared negotiation strategies for when the Lux returned. Dr. Han worked tirelessly, developing communication protocols and studying the limited information they had about the hegemony. At night, he would often step outside his temporary quarters and look up at the stars, wondering which one the Lux called home and how long Earth had before they returned. 1 month after the probe's departure, space telescopes detected unusual energy signatures at the edge of the solar system. Dr. Han received the call at 3 a.m. They're coming back, the voice on the phone said. And there are a lot more of them this time. Dr. Han closed his eyes briefly. Earth had made its choice, and now would face the consequences. Alert the Defense Council, he said. It's time to see if our boundaries will be respected after all. The massive Lux ships appeared suddenly one Tuesday morning. One moment the skies were clear, and the next they were filled with gleaming metal crafts that stretched for miles. They hovered over New York, Tokyo, London, Moscow, Beijing, and dozens of other major cities worldwide. Their size alone caused panic in the streets as people stopped to point and stare at the impossible sight above them. Inside the United Earth Defense Headquarters, Colonel Kim Hae-jin watched the satellite feeds with a grim expression. She was a small woman with short black hair and the stern eyes of someone used to making hard decisions. For 6 months, she had been preparing for this moment, though many had doubted the aliens would return. They didn't waste time, she said to her team. Activate Protocol Shield. Around the world, military units moved into predetermined positions, not to engage the alien ships directly, that would be suicide, but to prepare for the ground war that would follow. The Lux message came simultaneously on all communication channels, broadcasted in perfect local languages. People of Earth, your trial period has expired. The galactic hegemony has determined that your civilization requires immediate integration. Resistance is both futile and illogical. Cooperate, and the transition will be peaceful. Resist, and you will be subdued for your own protection. In the presidential emergency bunker, Dr. Han Ji-woo stood beside world leaders as they watched the broadcast. They're treating this like a corporate merger, the Canadian Prime Minister said. Dr. Han nodded. To them, it essentially is. They see us as a resource to be acquired. The first landing ships descended 3 hours later. They established bases in open areas outside major cities, parks, fields, and sports stadiums. The Lux emerged, their crystalline bodies catching the sunlight. They brought machines that began constructing structures at impossible speeds. Colonel Kim monitored the situation from her mobile command center. They're setting up processing centers, she said, just like we expected. Her second-in-command looked nervous. Ma'am, their technology is even more advanced than our worst estimates. How can we fight that? Colonel Kim smiled slightly. We don't fight their technology. We fight them. She turned to her communications officer. Send the signal. Operation Mosquito begins now. Across the globe, the resistance activated, but not in the way the Lux expected. In London, a group of university students approached the alien perimeter with signs welcoming the visitors. While the Lux were distracted by what they thought was human cooperation, other students hacked into the aliens' communication relay. In Rio de Janeiro, delivery drivers brought food to Lux stations as a peace offering. Hidden in the food containers were tiny EMP devices that short-circuited the aliens' personal shields. In Seoul, a team of gamers who had studied the Lux drone movements reprogrammed the security protocols, causing the machines to fly in circles rather than patrol. The Lux were baffled. Their conquest algorithms had never encountered such tactics. They were used to either direct military confrontation, which they could easily overcome, or immediate surrender. This strange mix of apparent cooperation and subtle sabotage confused their command structure. Commander Tool of the Lux forces stood in his base outside Tokyo, listening to reports of similar disruptions worldwide. His crystalline face couldn't show expressions, but his voice carried frustration. These primitives fight with unusual ferocity, he reported to Hegemony Central. They seem to value their inefficient autonomy over rational progress. The response came back. Deploy peacekeeping drones. Begin processing the population center by center. The drones were released, sleek, hovering machines that could identify and subdue humans. They spread through cities, scanning for resistance leaders. But humanity had been preparing. In Beijing, a team of hackers led by a 19-year-old girl had already cracked the drone operating system. Within hours, hundreds of drones were reprogrammed to deliver food and medicine to people hiding from the invasion instead of hunting them. In New York, the drones found themselves caught in simple net traps set up by construction workers. Colonel Kim received the reports with satisfaction. Phase 1 is working, she told her team. The Lux expected either a traditional war or no resistance at all. They don't understand how humans fight when we're outgunned. The processing centers were the next target. These were facilities where humans would be registered and integrated into the hegemony system. In reality, they were designed to identify potential troublemakers and implant tracking devices. Colonel Kim's strategy was simple but effective. Let the centers be built, then strike when least expected. In Chicago, a group of former prison inmates who had been trained by the Defense Force infiltrated a processing center at shift change. By morning, they had freed hundreds of captured humans and reprogrammed the facility's systems to show everything working normally. In Mumbai, local police who pretended to cooperate with the Lux suddenly turned on their alien supervisors, using their own technology against them. Commander Toll was furious. His reports to the hegemony became increasingly desperate. The humans employ irrational tactics. They sacrifice efficiency for unpredictability. Request additional forces and updated conquest protocols. 1 month into the occupation, the Lux held only a fraction of the territory they had expected to control. Their careful plans were in shambles, faced with an enemy that refused to fight according to any recognizable rules of engagement. Colonel Kim moved her command center nightly, staying ahead of Lux detection. During a rare meeting with Dr. Han, she showed him the resistance map. We've established networks in every major city, she explained. People from all walks of life. Teachers, plumbers, office workers. They're all part of this now. Dr. Han looked impressed. The Lux don't understand us. Their society values order and hierarchy. They can't comprehend why a taxi driver would risk his life to sabotage their equipment, or why a grandmother would hide resistance fighters. Colonel Kim nodded. That's our advantage. They see our individuality as weakness, but it's our strength. We don't need a chain of command to know what to do. As the sun set over their hidden base, reports came in of 3 more processing centers liberated, dozens of drones reprogrammed, and countless small acts of resistance worldwide. The Lux had come expecting an easy conquest. What they found instead was a planet of billions, each one a potential fighter with their own way of saying no. The Lux High Commander stood before the holographic map of Earth, his crystalline form glowing with a reddish hue that indicated extreme frustration. After 18 months of occupation, the situation was worse than when they had started. According to their models, Earth should have been fully integrated within weeks. "Explain this," he demanded, pointing to the flashing red dots that represented failed operations. The analysis officer, a younger Lux whose form was still developing its final crystalline pattern, hesitated before answering. "High Commander, we have lost control of 17 more sectors this week. Our drones continue to be compromised, and 3 processing centers were abandoned after local resistance made them inoperable." From his hidden base deep within the Rocky Mountains, Dr. Han Jiwoo watched the resistance reports come in. The former diplomat had become the voice of human resistance, coordinating between different groups worldwide. The cave system had been converted into a command center, with salvaged and modified Lux technology, providing power and communications. "It's time," he told his team. "Prepare the transmission." Using a captured Lux communication device, Dr. Han broadcast directly to the hegemony flagship orbiting Earth. His message was simple: "You were warned. Earth will never submit. Each day you remain costs you more than us." On the flagship, the Lux commanders gathered to discuss this unprecedented situation. They had conquered hundreds of worlds across the galaxy, and none had presented such difficulties. "We must understand these humans better," the High Commander decided. "Begin a deep analysis of their historical and cultural records." What they found disturbed them deeply. Human history was filled with war and conflict, yet somehow these struggles had not prevented technological advancement. Most species in the galaxy had either destroyed themselves before reaching space or had evolved beyond violence. Humans had done neither. "Look at this," one analyst said. "They fight constantly, tribe against tribe, nation against nation. Yet they also build remarkable cooperative structures. It makes no logical sense." The Lux were particularly troubled by humanity's response to overwhelming force. When faced with superior enemies, humans didn't calculate the odds and surrender as rational beings should. Instead, they fought harder, developed new tactics, and accepted losses that the Lux considered mathematically unacceptable. In a small farming village in South Korea, Park Min-ho was unaware that he was about to become an example of this human trait. The 17-year-old boy had been watching the Hegemony Walker Patrol near his family's farm for weeks. The massive 6-legged machine stood 3 stories tall and was used to monitor large rural areas. Min-ho's parents had told him to stay away from all alien technology, but curiosity drove him to study the walker's patterns. He noticed it always took the same route and stopped at the same locations to scan the surroundings. "It's just a big machine," he told his friend one evening. "And all machines have weaknesses." Min-ho had been a good chemistry student before the schools closed during the occupation. He remembered how different substances reacted with metals. Using equipment from his father's barn, he created a sticky paste that would conduct electricity but cause metal connections to corrode rapidly. The next day, Min-ho waited until the walker was at its farthest point from the village. He approached from behind, using the tall grass as cover. With his heart pounding, he smeared his chemical paste onto the walker's rear leg joints and quickly retreated. For 2 days, nothing happened. Then, during its regular patrol, the walker suddenly stumbled. Its movements became jerky as the corrosion spread through its hydraulic systems. The massive machine tried to compensate, but only made the problem worse as the paste spread to other joints. Within an hour, it had collapsed into an unmoving heap of alien metal. The Lux response team that arrived to investigate was baffled. Their diagnostics showed no programming errors, no EMP attack, no weapons damage. Just an unexpected chemical reaction that their materials scientists hadn't anticipated as a threat. When they discovered the farm boy was responsible, they were even more confused. Their threat assessment algorithms categorized adolescent humans as minimal risk. Yet this one had neutralized expensive military equipment, using only agricultural tools and basic chemistry. Word of Min-ho's success spread through resistance networks. Soon, similar tactics were being used against Lux technology worldwide. The occupiers found themselves facing not just organized resistance, but countless individual acts of sabotage that their predictive models couldn't anticipate. In the Hegemony flagship, the High Commander received yet another failure report. "This makes no sense," he said. "They must realize they cannot win. Why don't they accept the inevitable?" His second-in-command had been studying human psychology more closely. "Sir, I believe we fundamentally misunderstand these beings. When we issued our warning before occupation, we thought it was a diplomatic formality. But they genuinely were trying to avoid conflict, not for their sake, but for ours." "For ours? That's absurd." Nevertheless, the evidence suggests they knew exactly how they would respond to occupation. They were warning us that forcing them to fight would be costly for both sides. On Earth, Dr. Han gathered with his advisors to review their progress. The resistance had grown stronger despite the Lux's brutal crackdowns in some areas. Captured alien technology was being adapted for human use, and more occupation forces were being neutralized each day. "They still don't understand us," Dr. Han said. "They think we fight because we're irrational or primitive. They don't see that our diversity, the very chaos they want to fix, is what makes us strong." One of his advisors, a former history professor, nodded. Throughout human history, the most successful invaders were those who understood and adapted to local cultures. The Lux are doing the opposite, trying to force us into their mold. In his farm home, Minho was now helping other villages create their own defenses. He had become a local hero, though he was embarrassed by the attention. "I just did what made sense," he told an older resistance fighter who had come to learn his methods. "But Walker was a problem, so I solved it." This simple approach, seeing problems and solving them individually without waiting for orders, was exactly what the Lux couldn't comprehend or predict. Their entire civilization was built on order, hierarchy, and unified purpose. Humanity's seeming disorder was actually its greatest defense. As the sun set over Earth's battlefields, both large and small, the occupiers were slowly realizing a terrible truth. They had not just invaded a planet. They had awakened a species that had been practicing the art of resistance since its earliest days. The captured Lux transport ship rose from its hidden hangar in the Arizona desert. Its original sleek design now looked strange with human additions. Radar dishes, makeshift weapons systems, and painted symbols of Earth's resistance. Inside, a crew of 12 humans operated controls they had rebuilt to work with human hands instead of crystalline appendages. Captain Lee Junho checked the navigation system one final time before nodding to his pilot. "Take us up. Stay in the cloud cover until we reach the target." This was the 5th such modified ship now in human hands. 3 years of studying Lux technology had paid off in ways no one expected. Humans hadn't just learned to use alien tech, they had improved it. "They think too linearly," Engineer Choi had explained while redesigning the ship's defense systems. "Their shields are perfect against their own weapons, but they never considered alternative approaches." The human modifications were simple but effective. By slightly altering the energy frequency of Lux weapons and adding randomization algorithms to targeting systems, the Resistance had created weapons that hegemony defenses couldn't properly track or block. As Captain Lee's ship approached the Lux supply depot orbiting Earth, another change in the war became apparent. The hegemony guard ships responded slowly and with obvious confusion in their movements. "Something's wrong with their coordination," the tactical officer noted. "It's like they're arguing about what to do." Indeed, something very strange was happening among the hegemony forces. After 3 years on Earth, many Lux soldiers were behaving in ways their superiors found deeply troubling. On the hegemony command ship, Regional Commander Tai Shin faced a disciplinary review. Once the occupation's strongest supporter, he had recently begun questioning central directives. "Explain your failure to process Sector 7, demanded the adjudicator, a senior Lux whose crystalline form held the perfect symmetry of high rank. Tai Shin's own form had changed subtly during his time on Earth. The previously perfect geometric patterns now showed slight irregularities, physical manifestations of his changing thoughts. The humans in that sector include many young offspring, Taishin explained. Processing would separate them from their caretakers. This seemed unnecessary. Unnecessary. The adjudicator's form flashed with angry red light. Since when does a commander decide what is necessary? The algorithm determined the optimal approach. Taishin hesitated before answering. I began to wonder if the algorithm accounts for all variables. This kind of thinking was spreading throughout hegemony forces stationed on Earth. Lux soldiers who spent time among humans started asking questions that had been eliminated from their society centuries ago. Why do we follow these rules? What if there's a better way? What do I want? In a secret facility beneath London, Dr. Han Jiwoo sat across from 5 captured Lux officers. This unprecedented meeting had been requested by the aliens themselves, something unimaginable just months earlier. We wish to understand, said the lead Lux, whose name translated roughly as bright crystal. How do you function without central direction? Dr. Han smiled slightly. That's a big question. Perhaps I can show you instead. He turned to the humans in the room. Everyone, please solve this problem. How would you move water from the river to that hill over there for crops? Each human immediately offered a different solution. A pump system, a series of buckets, digging the canal, rainwater collection. You see, Dr. Han said to the bewildered aliens. No central plan. Each mind approached the problem differently. From those different ideas, we can choose the best one, or combine several. Bright crystal's crystalline form shimmered with what humans had learned was their expression of deep thought. But this is chaotic, inefficient. Is it? Dr. Han asked. Or does it create resilience? If one solution fails, we have others. If conditions change, we adapt quickly because we're already thinking differently from each other. These conversations were happening across Earth wherever Lux and humans interacted. The longer the occupation continued, the more hegemony forces were exposed to human ideas, and the more those ideas spread. In the Galactic Council chamber, emergency sessions had been called. The massive circular room with its thousands of crystalline representatives had not faced such a crisis in millennia. Commander Taishin stood before them, his once perfect form now showing distinct individual patterns that marked him as changed. We have awakened something, he told the shocked council. These humans don't simply resist, they transform those around them. Our own troops are becoming individualistic. The word caused visible distress among the council members. Individualism had been systematically bred out of hegemony species over countless generations. Their society functioned on perfect harmony and unified purpose. The very concept of individual choice was seen as a primitive evolutionary stage they had long outgrown. This is a contagion, declared the council leader. All affected units must be recalled and purified. That may not be possible, Taishin replied with unprecedented bluntness. Many no longer wish to return. This revelation sent shockwaves through the council. Hegemony citizens not wishing to follow directives. It was unthinkable. On Earth, signs of the changing Lux were everywhere. Some had begun modifying their crystalline forms with asymmetrical patterns copied from human art. Others requested specific assignments rather than accepting algorithmic placement. Most troubling to hegemony leadership, some had started using names instead of designation numbers. Back in the London facility, Dr. Han continued his discussions with the curious Lux officers. Your empire ignored something fundamental, he explained as they watched humans working together on a community project. Diversity of thought is not weakness but strength. Each human is different, and from that difference comes our resilience. Bright Crystal had been watching children playing in a nearby park. They disagree, yet continue playing together. They negotiate without central authority. It's fascinating. It's freedom, Dr. Han said simply. We value it above almost anything. The idea was spreading like wildfire among the Lux stationed on Earth. Freedom, choice, self-determination. Concepts their society had erased long ago were reawakening, sparked by human contact. In space, Captain Lee's modified ship successfully disabled the supply depot's defenses using their unpredictable human-modified weapons. As they docked, they were surprised to find minimal resistance. "The guards are letting us in," the tactical officer said in disbelief. Inside, they found Lux workers who had been questioning their assignments. Some actively helped the humans access the supply inventories. One Lux approached Captain Lee. "I have been watching Earth transmissions," it said. "Your music, your stories. They all celebrate being different. How can you create technology while maintaining such chaos?" Captain Lee laughed. "That's exactly why we create. Because we're all different. We see different solutions, different possibilities." As the human crew loaded supplies onto their ship, this conversation repeated throughout the facility. The hegemony's greatest fear was coming true. Their perfect order was breaking down in the face of humanity's stubborn individualism. The occupation that was meant to bring Earth into the hegemony's ordered embrace was instead bringing chaos to an empire that had forgotten what it meant to be free. The signing ceremony took place on neutral ground, a space station orbiting between Earth and Moon. Dr. Han Jiwoo sat at one end of the long table, while the Lux High Council representative sat at the other. Between them lay the peace accord, a document that would have seemed impossible just months earlier. "On behalf of Earth, I accept these terms," Dr. Han said, pressing his thumb to the biometric scanner. The Lux representative, whose crystalline form now displayed unique patterns showing individual identity, did the same. The Galactic Hegemony recognizes Earth as a sovereign and independent world. 5 years had passed since the small probe first landed in Antarctica. 5 years of resistance, adaptation, and unexpected transformation. No one had predicted this outcome, not the humans who had prepared for endless war, nor the hegemony who had expected simple conquest. Outside the station viewport, Earth shone blue and beautiful. The hegemony ships were already departing, not in defeat, but in something more profound, a change of understanding. Back on Earth, people celebrated in the streets. The occupation was over. Humanity had not only survived, but somehow changed the invaders themselves. Park Min-ho, now a young man and engineer working on adapting Lux technology, watched the ceremony broadcast with his family. "They never understood us," he said. "They thought order meant strength." "And now?" his father asked. Min-ho smiled. "Now they're learning what we've always known, that freedom creates possibilities." Across the galaxy, those possibilities were already taking shape. Within months of the Earth Treaty, other worlds within the hegemony began demanding similar autonomy. The ideas that had infected Lux forces on Earth spread to other species and planets. On Luxterra, the hegemony homeworld, protests erupted for the first time in thousands of years. Young Lux displayed deliberately asymmetrical crystalline patterns as symbols of individuality. They called for an end to algorithmic life assignments and demanded the right to choose their own paths. The Galactic Council, once unified in purpose, fractured along new lines. Some members clung desperately to the old order, while others embraced the changes sweeping through their civilization. 1 year after the peace treaty, Dr. Han traveled to Luxterra as Earth's first ambassador. The gleaming crystal cities were still beautiful and orderly, but signs of change were everywhere. Art with irregular patterns decorated public spaces. Lux citizens engaged in open debates and forums. Some had even taken individual names. "Welcome, Ambassador Han," said his host, a Lux who had chosen the name Sunho after serving on Earth. Once a commander who had led forces against humanity, Sunho now headed the reformed Lux Republic, a new governmental structure that balanced central coordination with individual rights. "Your world has changed," Dr. Han observed as they toured the capital. Sunho's crystalline form shimmered with what Dr. Han now recognized as amusement. "Everything has changed. You humans awakened questions we have forgotten how to ask." The changes weren't limited to the Lux. Throughout the former hegemony, dozens of species began rediscovering their own cultures and traditions. Worlds that had been fully integrated for millennia began establishing independent governments while maintaining peaceful relations with their neighbors. 3 years after the peace treaty, these new independent worlds formed the Galactic Confederation, a loose alliance based on mutual respect rather than centralized control. Earth, despite its technological limitations, was invited as a founding member. On the 5th anniversary of the peace treaty, representatives from across the galaxy gathered in the new Confederation Hall on Earth. The location was symbolic, a recognition that this Category 3 civilization had fundamentally changed the galactic order. Colonel Kim Haijin, now retired from military service, addressed the assembled delegates. Though her hair had grayed, she stood straight and proud as she spoke. When the hegemony first came to Earth, they saw only what they expected to see, a primitive world to be absorbed. They thought our warnings were threats. They were actually predictions. Humanity doesn't just survive. We transform everything we touch. They should have listened. The crowd included humans and dozens of alien species, including many Lux whose forms now displayed unique individual patterns. They applauded her words, recognizing the truth in them. Later that evening, at a reception in the Confederation Gardens, Dr. Han found himself speaking with Sun Ho. The former commander had become one of the most progressive leaders in the new Lux Republic. "I've been studying human history," Sun Ho said. "So much conflict, so much struggle. Yet somehow, you never lost the capacity for change that we engineered out of ourselves." Dr. Han nodded. "We're still learning how to balance individual freedom with collective needs. We haven't perfected it." "That's just it," Sun Ho replied, his crystalline form catching the sunset light. "The greatest scientific discovery of our age is that freedom, despite its apparent chaos, creates stronger societies than any imposed order. Earth didn't defeat us. It liberated us from ourselves." Across the galaxy, the changes continued to spread. Art, music, and ideas flowed between worlds that had previously only exchanged resources and technology. Species that had been part of the hegemony for so long they'd forgotten their origins began rediscovering their heritage. Young Lux particularly embraced human concepts like choice and self-expression. They modified their crystalline forms in ways their ancestors would have found shocking, displaying unique patterns that identified them as individuals rather than perfect replicas of their type. Earth itself was transformed too. Alien technology adapted by human ingenuity solved environmental problems and opened new frontiers. The first human ships capable of interstellar travel were already being built, using principles learned from Lux technology, but modified in uniquely human ways. As night fell on the anniversary celebration, Dr. Han stood alone for a moment, watching the stars. Among them now were not potential invaders but partners, friends, and allies. The hegemony's greatest mistake wasn't attacking Earth. It was assuming that humans would respond like any other species. They didn't just ignore Earth's warning, they failed to understand it. And in doing so, they unwittingly triggered a peaceful revolution that forever changed the galaxy. Out among those stars, countless beings were now asking questions they had never considered before, making choices their ancestors couldn't imagine, and discovering the strength that comes not from perfect order, but from the beautiful chaos of freedom.